And just for the record, Dr. Collins came before us and said that the hypothesis that the COVID-19 pandemic was a result of a lab leak or lab-related accident is not a conspiracy theory. Would you agree with that?
I think it's just an alternate theory that needs to be considered.
Okay.
Did NIH fund gain-of-function research at the Wuhan Institute of Virology through EcoHealth?
It depends on your definition of gain-of-function research. If you're speaking about the generic term, yes, we did.
Dr. David Moran, a senior advisor to Dr. Fauci for decades, wrote in an email to Dr. Daszak, quote, "I learned from our FOIA lady here how to make emails disappear after I am FOIA'd, but before the search starts. So I think we are all safe. Plus, I deleted most of those earlier emails after sending them to Gmail."
Our witness today is Dr. Lawrence Tabak. Dr. Tabak is the Principal Deputy Director of the National Institutes of Health and served as Acting Director of the NIH from December of 2021 to November of 2023. We understand that the HHS has suspended EcoHealth's federal grants and is proposing debarment, and we appreciate that. While I understand that HHS will have to conduct their own review before debarring EcoHealth, I understand that. Do you think HHS would have been able to issue this suspension without the Select Subcommittee's investigation? And will it be helpful, the investigation to date, will it be helpful toward creating new policies going forward, either through NIH or Congress itself?
As you point out, Mr. Chair, the suspension and proposal to debar was conducted by HHS, and so I really can't comment on what input they considered in preparing that documentation.
Despite what Dr. Daszak testified, the Select Subcommittee recently uncovered an email that he wrote on October 1, 2021, to the personal email of Dr. David Moran. He said, "Here's the truth behind this mystery." This is, quote, "Here's the truth behind this mystery. We got our report ready to file for the Year 5 grant, but when it was funded, we assumed we didn't need to. It was the first time we'd had a renewal. We then had our grant terminated by Trump and assumed we definitely wouldn't need to at that point," end quote. Does this sound like a more accurate description of events as opposed to a system lockout?
I can't comment on his email. All I can say to you is that our system did not lock them out, and there was no impediment for them to provide that report on time.
And just for the record, Dr. Collins came before us and said that the hypothesis that the COVID-19 pandemic was a result of a lab leak or lab-related accident is not a conspiracy theory. Would you agree with that?
I think it's just an alternate theory that needs to be considered.
Okay. I want to actually focus on NIH. When NIH certified EcoHealth's compliance and renegotiated the grant, was NIH aware of the EcoHealth would still be communicating with the debarred Wuhan Institute of Technology? Last year was when they were debarred, and they were still obtaining data and conducting experiments with that information.
Once they were debarred, I do not believe that there is any requirement that they can no longer have conversations with WIV. Is that the time frame?
Well, no. Well,
WIV
was debarred,
right,
and EcoHealth was still talking to them. Are we certain that no federal funds have gone to the WIV since the debarment?
No NIH funds have gone to the WIV since the debarment.
Okay, and is that possible that it's gone through the EcoHealth to WIV as a subgrant? Are you? I'm saying
we checked USA.spending, and to my knowledge, no funds once they were debarred went to WIV from NIH.
Dr. Tabak, did NIH fund gain-of-function research at the Wuhan Institute of Virology through EcoHealth?
It depends on your definition of gain-of-function research. If you're speaking about the generic term, yes, we did, but this is research, the generic term is research that goes on in many, many labs around the country. It is not regulated, and the reason it's not regulated is it poses no threat or harm to anybody.
Thank you. Dr. Tabak, since COVID-19, we've seen many problems with the Wuhan Institute of Virology and the Chinese Communist Party hiding information and refusing to provide data to the United States. Do you believe this lack of transparency cost Americans their lives?
I can't speak to that directly. I can tell you that the failure of the Wuhan Institute of Virology to provide us with the data that we requested and the lab notebooks that we requested certainly impeded our ability to understand what was really going on with the experiments that we have been discussing this morning.
And because of that, do you think we should continue to provide, or the NIH should continue to provide grants where lab work will be done in China?
Well, this, as you know, the Wuhan Institute of Virology has been disbarred, so we will not be doing.
How about any other labs? Should we fund any work in labs in China?
I think if you look at the new policy that has just been released, there is mention of consideration for funding in countries of concern, and China is one of those countries.
So I don't understand your answer. Does that mean you don't want to fund labs in China anymore?
That would have to come under very, very high scrutiny before it was done.
Dr. Tabak, at the time of funding to EcoHealth, did NIH have a concrete, understandable definition of risky, of concern, gain-of-function research throughout NIH?
I can't talk for the whole of NIH, but certainly the organizations that support this type of research had an understanding.
All right. In the United States, what level of biosecurity would be used for the type of research that was being done at the Wuhan Institute of Virology under the sub-grant from EcoHealth?
There were two types of experiments they did. The experiments involving cell culture would likely be done at a BSL-2 level, and the experiments involved with mice would likely be done at a BSL-3 level.
Thank you. And how much time do I have? Oh, I've got some time. Good. NIH boasts a rigorous grant review process. Dr. Morenz, a senior advisor to Dr. Fauci, stated the following about Peter Daszak, the president of EcoHealth. Quote, "Peter Daszak is one of my oldest and best friends, and I talk to him all the time," unquote. Indeed, after one of Dr. Daszak EcoHealth's grants from NIH was suspended in response to EcoHealth's violation of grant policies, Dr. Morenz wrote to Dr. Daszak from his private Gmail instead of his official email. It appears from what our committee has learned that Dr. Morenz and Dr. Daszak regularly conspired to reinstate Dr. Daszak's grant, all while avoiding federal records laws and the transparency of FOIA. My question is, do you believe these statements that were made and actions between Dr. Morenz and Dr. Daszak undercut NIH's claim of a rigorous grant review process?
I can't speak to the specifics because I am not privy to any of this, but certainly one would not have a federal official having discussions of that type with a potential grantee.
And does Dr. Morenz still work for NIH?
Dr. Morenz is an employee of NIH, yes.
And was there any repercussions for him using private emails and avoiding FOIA?
We do not discuss personnel issues, as you know.
Well, I certainly hope that when somebody violates federal law, that there should be some type of repercussions. So it seems very convenient that you can't tell us anything. But I thank you, and I yield back.
I want to ask both about the situation regarding EcoHealth and a few questions regarding the Institute's record retention policies. Starting with EcoHealth. Yesterday, HHS proposed debarring them from federal funds, from receiving federal funds. Does NIH agree with this decision?
Yes, we do.
Back in 2020, when NIH originally terminated and then suspended the EcoHealth grant, many scientists were outraged. We have emails where Dr. Daszak called NIH actions Stalinesque. He called you, NIH acting dentist director, Tabak, and your oversight actions as an anti-science shit show. And that's a quote, not my word. Dr. Tabak, do you agree with the request NIH made of EcoHealth?
Oh, absolutely.
Dr. Tabak, do you agree with the actions NIH has taken against EcoHealth?
Completely.
Is anyone entitled to receive federal funds?
Of course not. You have to demonstrate your ability to oversee them correctly.
And did EcoHealth fail to satisfactorily answer NIH's request?
They have.
All right. So NIH reinstated EcoHealth's grant on the condition that there would be no work in China and the Wuhan lab had already been debarred. Dr. Daszak testified that since then, and during the course of the grant, he spoke routinely with the Wuhan Institute of Virology to get data and publish papers. Did Dr. Daszak ever inform the NIH that he would keep working with the Wuhan lab even though they were debarred?
Not to my knowledge.
Shifting to some questions regarding NIH's document retention policies. Dr. David Moranz, a senior advisor to Dr. Fauci for decades, wrote in an email to Dr. Daszak, quote, "I learned from our FOIA lady here how to make emails disappear after I am FOIA'd, but before the search starts. So I think we are all safe. Plus, I deleted most of those earlier emails after sending them to Gmail," end quote. Is that consistent with NIH document retention policies?
It is not.
Does the NIH FOIA office teach employees how to avoid transparency?
I certainly hope not.
He also later wrote Dr. Daszak, and I quote, "We are all smart enough to know to never have smoking guns, and if we did, we wouldn't put them in emails. And if we found them, we would delete them," end quote. Is that consistent with NIH document retention policies?
It is not.
Finally, emails show that Dr. Moranz would share internal discussions regarding upcoming FOIA releases with Dr. Daszak. He would then help Dr. Daszak craft responses to documents being released in these FOIAs. Are those actions consistent with NIH policies?
If those actions occurred, they would not be consistent. No.
So do these actions concern you, Dr. Tabak?
It does indeed.
What is Dr. Moran's current employment status?
He is an employee of NIH.
Well, I think you see where my lines of questioning were leading. We have some serious concerns. We have fought in the select subcommittee, the oversight committee, on obtaining information. And, here you have admission of deleting information, going to great lengths to not be transparent in an apparent cover-up of something that I think we would agree in a bipartisan manner is one of the most serious issues that our country's ever faced, the COVID-19 pandemic. So I appreciate the work of Chairman Winstrup and the full committee here to try to get to the truth, give the American people the truth, because that's what they want, and that's what this committee's role is. But we also want to hold people accountable for wrongdoing. So we look forward to working with you to help us achieve what the American people want us to achieve in this select committee.
And based on this information, I question how EcoHealth could have fulfilled grant requirements without violating the terms of the Wuhan Institute of Virology's debarment. Dr. Tabak, at the time NIH certified EcoHealth's compliance and NIAID renegotiated the grant, was NIH aware that EcoHealth would still be in communication with the Wuhan Institute of Virology?
Not to my knowledge.
At the time that the NIH certified EcoHealth's compliance and NIAID renegotiated the grant, was NIH aware that EcoHealth would rely on data from the Wuhan Institute of Virology to meet the aims of the grant?
To put a point on it, data that they already had in their possession or data that they had yet to gain?
Both.
We assumed that they would use data that was already in their possession, but we did not assume that they were still interacting about data that they did not yet have in.
So there was no awareness of continued interaction.
I had no awareness of that, no.
Dr. Daszak and EcoHealth Alliance were dishonest in their stewardship of taxpayer dollars, and ultimately they were caught and tried to find ways to cover this up, and that's pretty obvious from what we've heard today. Dr. Daszak's testimony in front of this committee contradicted statements of the National Institute of Health and the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Disease, and we appreciate you, Dr. Tabak, for taking time to clarify the record today. However, we're having this hearing today because NIH's failed policies and procedures and lack of oversight that granted EcoHealth Alliance dollars to conduct dangerous gain-of-function research in the first place. And despite what you hear from colleagues on the other side of the aisle often here, I'm astonished that they continue to bury their head in the sand on this issue. The evidence is overwhelming from what we've heard on this committee that the virus did not evolve naturally, but was a result of some sort of gain-of-function manipulation. It's not logical to assume at this point that this is a total coincidence and that it just happened to emerge in Wuhan, China, and it just happened to be where Dr. Fauci, Peter Daszak, and NIH and EcoHealth Alliance just happened to be funding gain-of-function research on a coronavirus with U.S. taxpayer dollars. And that's becoming more and more obvious every day. We saw that the funding was suspended by HHS just yesterday. I have an article here that I was reading online just before coming in here that was published last night. It says, for years now, EcoHealth has generated immense controversy for its use of federal grant money to support gain-of-function research on bat coronaviruses in the Wuhan lab. It goes on to say, in a memo justifying its funding suspension, HHS said that EcoHealth had failed to properly monitor the work it was supporting at Wuhan. It also failed to properly report the results of experiments showing that the hybrid viruses it was creating there had improved the ability to infect human cells. That was from HHS. And then it goes on to describe some of the research and what it was intended to do, and it says, soon enough, EcoHealth used some of the viruses that they collected to create chimeric or hybrid viruses that might be better able to infect human lung cells in genetically engineered humanized mice. I think that in my particular opinion, it's become obvious that NIH has become too independent, too rogue, and too unregulated at this particular point.
Dr. Tabak, are you aware of the different definitions various federal agencies use to define gain-of-function research?
I'm aware of two different definitions, one very broad and generic, which is unregulated, and one more precise and certainly regulated.
Yes, it seems to me that this is sort of like what the definition of is. Do you believe having one definition that is universally employed would be more effective?
It would. The broad definition is lab jargon. It's just the way scientists speak. The precise definition, which is regulated, of course, that's the important one, because that's the one that regulates the experiments that people are concerned about.
Well, it seems that there was gain-of-function research occurring, but denied that it was occurring because it didn't meet that precise definition. Do you believe that having multiple definitions of gain-of-function research has led to gaps in oversight?
I believe it leads to confusion. I think those who are regulating things understand that they need to use the regulatory framework.
The NIH relied on Dr. Daszak to monitor and report virus growth after being a month late on his annual reporting requirements, which were outlined in the grant. Dr. Tabak, looking back, did the NIH rely too much on Dr. Daszak's self-reporting information?
Again, with the benefit of hindsight, we did, because we never received the information, unfortunately.
Well, as an ophthalmologist, hindsight is always 20/20.
Indeed.
Was the information NIH received accurate?
From Dr. Daszak? We don't think so, and that's why we asked for the additional materials, the metadata, the electronic records, the laboratory notebooks, which hopefully would have been able to clarify all of these issues.
Dr. Tabak, when the National Institute of Health requested the notebooks from EcoHealth, was EcoHealth required to produce them under its grant's terms?
Yes, they were.
Okay, thank you. When NIH requested the notebooks from EcoHealth, should EcoHealth have been able to access them or already have access to them?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. Did EcoHealth ever produce the requested notebooks?
They have not.
Never did. Thank you. Dr. Dazik testified 2 weeks ago that he was not required to produce the lab notebooks. Would NIH disagree with that testimony?
Yes, we disagree with that testimony.
Thank you, Dr. Tabak, for clarifying that. The testifying here today clarifies the inconsistency between Dr. Dazik's testimony and the testimony of numerous NIH officials.
If there's no further business, without objection, the Select Subcommittee stands adjourned.